The Gray Path, a Star Wars story. Chapter 1. The Fall of House Voss. The twin sons of Kalara cast long shadows across the crystalline plains as Jedi Knight Kalen Voss guided his starfighter through the atmosphere. After 3 months negotiating a trade dispute on Malastare, he was eager to return home to his family. The mission had been successful. Another peaceful resolution that proved the Jedi way of diplomacy over conflict. Master Windu would be pleased with his report. But something was wrong. As his ship descended toward the modest settlement where he'd built his life, Kalen felt a disturbance in the Force unlike anything he'd experienced. It wasn't the familiar presence of his wife Lyra, or the bright, untrained potential of his 7-year-old twins, Kira and Tam. This was darkness, raw, hungry, and tinged with the acrid taste of smoke. The first thing he saw was the smoke rising from what had been his home. Kalen's hands trembled on the controls as he brought his fighter down in the charred remains of his garden. The house where Lyra had sung lullabies to their children, where he'd taught them to sense the Force through meditation among the crystal flowers, was nothing but blackened stone and twisted metal. The workshop where Lyra crafted her sculptures, her way of channeling the Force after leaving the Jedi Order to marry him, was a crater in the earth. He stumbled from his ship, calling their names, though he already knew. The Force whispered the truth he couldn't accept. His family was gone. In the ruins of their bedroom, half buried beneath fallen beams, he found them. 3 lightsabers lay arranged in a deliberate pattern, Lyra's elegant silver hilt crossed with the simple training sabers he'd been crafting for the twins. A message. A trophy. A final cruelty from whoever had done this. Kalen fell to his knees, gathering the hilts against his chest. The metal was still warm from the fires, as if holding on to the last traces of the lives they'd protected. For 17 years, he had been the perfect Jedi, calm, measured, devoted to peace. But kneeling in the ashes of his world, something inside him snapped. The rage came like a dam bursting. It poured through him, hot and electric, until the very air around him began to crackle. Lightning blue-white and hungry danced between his fingers. The fallen beams groaning above him, and somewhere in his peripheral vision, he was dimly aware of his starfighter's engines powering down as the electrical discharge interfered with its systems. Through the bond he'd shared with Lyra, now severed and bleeding in the Force, he sensed movement in the sky. Ships, the same raiders who had murdered his family, returning to claim salvage from their destruction. Kalen rose, the lightsabers still clutched in one hand while lightning writhed around the other. The raiders' fighters swooped low over the settlement, and he could see their pilots through the transparent steel alien faces, twisted with cruel satisfaction as they surveyed their handiwork. They never saw him coming. The lightning erupted from him in a torrent that lit up the twilight sky. It caught the lead fighter's engine and tore through its hull like paper. The ship exploded in a cascade of fire and metal, and Kalen felt a savage satisfaction that terrified him even as it consumed him. The second fighter tried to pull up, but his power reached it too, sending it cartwheeling into the crystal plains in a ball of flame. The third ship's pilot, perhaps finally realizing what he faced, fired desperately at the figure standing in the ruins. Kalen caught the blaster bolts with his bare hand, the energy dissipating against the Force barrier he'd unconsciously erected. Then he reached out with his mind, seized the ship's controls, and crushed them like an insect. When the silence returned, broken only by the crackling of fires and his own ragged breathing, Kalen stared at his hands in horror. The lightning was gone, but he could still feel it just beneath his skin, waiting, eager. The dark side had answered his call so easily, so naturally, that for a moment it had felt like coming home. He looked down at his family's lightsabers and felt the weight of what he'd become in a single moment of grief. A Jedi who had tasted the dark side and found it intoxicating. A man who had crossed a line that the Order taught was impossible to uncross. But as he knelt again among the ruins, holding the only pieces of his family he had left, Kalen Voss made a decision that would change the galaxy. He would not run from what he'd done. He would not pretend it hadn't happened. And he would not let it happen again. Not the way the Sith did, through surrender to darkness. He would find another way. The stars emerged overhead as the fires finally died, and somewhere in their cold light, the first gray Jedi began his long journey toward balance. Chapter 2. Exile and Temptation. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant felt like a tomb to Kalen as he walked its familiar corridors one last time. He had returned only long enough to submit his resignation and gather what he needed for his self-imposed exile. The other Jedi he passed sensed the change in him. The way the Force swirled around him now carried an edge that made them unconsciously step aside. Master Yoda had tried to counsel him, speaking of grief and the path back to the light. Master Windu had been more direct, warning that the dark side was seductive and that isolation would only make him more vulnerable. But Kalen had made his choice. He could not remain among the Jedi while this new power coursed through him, threatening to emerge whenever his control slipped. "When the way you have found, the Order welcome will," Yoda had said, his ancient eyes full of sadness. "But careful must you be. To fall easy, to climb back up difficult." Kalen had bowed respectfully. Knowing the old master was wrong about one thing, he had no intention of climbing back up. He was going to find a different path entirely. The abandoned Sith temple on Dromund Fells was a place of legend and terror, a world the Jedi avoided, and the Sith had long since abandoned. It was perfect for what Kalen needed: isolation, ancient knowledge, and a place where he could explore the darker aspects of the Force without endangering others. The temple itself was a massive ziggurat of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As Kalen's ship touched down in the shadow of its towering spires, he felt the weight of centuries of dark side energy pressing against his mind. Lesser beings would have fled screaming. Instead, he gathered his pack of ancient texts, both Jedi and Sith, and walked toward the entrance. The interior was a maze of corridors, lined with murals, depicting the rise and fall of the old Sith Empire. Kalen made his camp in what had once been a meditation chamber, its walls carved with symbols that seemed to shift in his peripheral vision. Here, surrounded by the accumulated darkness of ages, he began his research. The Jedi text spoke of the dark side as corruption, a cancer that consumed those who touched it. The Sith writings described it as liberation, the only true path to power. But in the oldest documents, fragments of pre-Republic philosophy and accounts from the first Force users, he found references to something else: the gray path, balance. Force users who had walked between light and dark without falling to either extreme. It was on his third month in the temple that he encountered the Spirit. Kalen was deep in meditation, practicing the dangerous exercise of calling upon both aspects of the Force simultaneously, when a presence made itself known. Not malevolent exactly, but ancient and complex in ways that made his head spin. "Interesting technique," a voice said, and Kalen's eyes snapped open to see a translucent figure standing before him. The Spirit wore armor that had once been magnificent, though its style was from an age long past. Half the figure's face was scarred, and his eyes held a weight of experience that even Master Yoda's couldn't match. "I am Revan," the Spirit continued, and Kalen's blood chilled. Every Jedi knew that name, the knight who had fallen to the dark side, led the Sith, then returned to the light, only to disappear into the unknown regions. "You're dead," Kalen said, his hand instinctively moving to his lightsaber. "Death is a matter of perspective," Revan replied with something that might have been amusement. "I've been watching you, Kalen Voss. Your approach is unorthodox. I'm seeking balance, something between the rigid dogma of the Jedi and the chaos of the Sith." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong." Revan began to pace, his ghostly form leaving no footprints on the dusty floor. The Force isn't a scale to be balanced. It's not light on one side and dark on the other. That's a simplification that both the Jedi and Sith use to make sense of something far more complex. Then what is it? The Force simply is. It's the energy that binds all living things, and like any energy, it can be channeled in different ways. Passion and serenity, emotion and peace, power and restraint. The Jedi fear one set of feelings, the Sith embrace only the others. But true understanding comes from accepting all aspects of existence. Revan gestured to the chamber around them. This temple has seen both Sith and Jedi. The dark side energies here aren't evil, they're simply focused emotion and will. The danger comes not from touching them, but from being controlled by them. Over the following weeks, the spirit of Revan became Kalen's unlikely teacher. The fallen knight shared techniques that no living Jedi or Sith knew, methods for channeling dark side energy without corruption, ways to maintain emotional control while accessing passion and anger, exercises for switching between different aspects of the Force without losing one's center. "Watch," Revan said during one lesson, and Kalen felt the ghost somehow manipulate the Force around them. Lightning danced in one of the spirit's hands while healing energy glowed in the other. Light and dark, but I am controlled by neither. This is what it means to be gray. The Jedi would say you're falling to the dark side. The Jedi would be wrong. I fell when I allowed the dark side to make my choices for me. I returned to the light when I reclaimed that control. But true wisdom lies in understanding that both are tools, nothing more. Kalen practiced relentlessly. He learned to summon Sith lightning without rage, to use Force healing while feeling the full weight of his grief, to fight with passion while maintaining perfect clarity of thought. Each day brought new understanding, and each night brought dreams of his family. Not the nightmares that had plagued him since their death, but memories of joy that he could finally experience without the pain overwhelming him. "You're ready," Revan said one evening as they watched the sun set over the desolate landscape. "But ready for what? You must decide for yourself." "Ready for what?" "To return to the galaxy, to show others that there is another way. The Sith are rising again. I can sense it even from beyond death. And when they do, the Jedi will need allies who understand their enemy's strengths without sharing their weaknesses." Kalen looked down at his hands, where he could now summon either lightning or healing energy at will, switching between them as easily as breathing. The power no longer felt foreign or terrifying. It felt like a part of him that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. "The first gray Jedi in 1,000 years, Revan mused. "I wonder what you'll make of the galaxy, Kalen Voss. Or perhaps more importantly, what will it make of you?" As Kalen prepared to leave Dromund Fells, he knew he was no longer the man who had arrived 6 months ago. He was something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, something it desperately needed. Chapter 3. The First Test. The neon-soaked undercity of Nar Shaddaa assaulted Kalen's senses as he made his way through the crowded streets. The Smuggler's Moon had always been a place where the desperate came to disappear, but something was different now. He could feel it in the Force, a corruption spreading through the youth of the criminal underworld like a plague. It had been 2 months since he'd left Dromund Fells, and Kalen had spent that time wandering the Outer Rim, testing his new abilities in small ways. A pirate crew turned against each other with a subtle Force suggestion here, a corrupt governor's conscience awakened with a careful blend of intimidation and compassion there. Each time, he found himself switching fluidly between techniques that would have horrified the Jedi Council, using fear as a tool one moment, offering genuine healing the next. But this was different. This was a Sith Lord, and Kalen could sense the dark side radiating from somewhere deep in the moon's industrial sector. He found the source in an abandoned docking bay that had been converted into some kind of arena. Crowds of alien species cheered as young humans, Twi'leks, and others fought in brutal combat, their eyes glowing with an unnatural red light. At the center of it all stood a figure in flowing black robes, her pale skin marked with ritual scars, and her yellow eyes burning with Sith fire. Darth Malise. Kaelin had heard whispers of her in the canteen as a Sith Lord who recruited from the dregs of society, promising power to those who had nothing left to lose. She was turning these lost children into an army of dark side adepts, feeding on their desperation and rage. "You feel it, don't you?" a voice said beside him, and Kaelin turned to see a Rhodian crime boss watching the spectacle with calculating eyes. "The power! She's offering what the Republic never could a chance for our kind to matter." Kaelin studied the arena below, watching as a human boy, who couldn't have been more than 16, channeled crude force lightning to defeat his opponent. The crowd roared its approval, but he could see the corruption eating away at the child's soul with each victory. And what does she ask in return? Service, loyalty, the usual. The Rhodian's antenna twitched. "Though I hear she's been talking about something bigger lately. A new order, where the strong rule and the weak serve. Starting here, in the underworld, then spreading outward." Kaelin had heard enough. He made his way down to the arena floor, his presence causing ripples in the force that made several of the dark side adepts look around nervously. Darth Malise noticed him immediately, her predatory smile widening as she sensed what he was. "Well, well, a Jedi come to save the poor misguided children?" She gestured grandly to her gathered followers. "You're too late, Knight. They've already chosen their path." "Have they?" Kaelin stepped into the makeshift arena, his lightsaber still clipped to his belt. "Or have you simply offered them the only choice they could see?" Malise laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Spoken like a true defender of the weak. Tell me, Jedi, when you were a child begging for scraps in some core world gutter, did the Republic offer you power? Did your precious order come to lift you up?" "I'm not here as a Jedi," Kaelin said quietly, and something in his tone made the crowd fall silent. "I'm here as someone who understands what you're offering these children, and what it will cost them." The Sith Lord's eyes narrowed as she studied him more carefully. "You're different. I can sense the dark side in you, yet you stand with such balance." "How interesting. Face me, Malise. If I win, your hold on these children is broken. If you win," he shrugged, "then perhaps the galaxy deserves what's coming." Malise drew her lightsaber, its crimson blade casting bloody shadows across the arena floor. "You have no idea what you're facing, fallen Jedi. I have studied under masters you cannot imagine. I have power beyond—" She struck without warning, her blade moving in a perfect Makashi thrust aimed at his heart. But Kaelin was already moving, his own blue blade igniting just in time to deflect the attack. The crowd gasped as the two lightsabers locked, and Kaelin could feel Malise trying to overwhelm him with raw dark side energy. "Impressive," she hissed, pressing harder against his guard. "But you still fight like a Jedi. All defense, no killer instinct." "You're right," Kaelin said, and did something that shocked even himself. He opened himself to the dark side, let his carefully controlled anger at what she'd done to these children flow through him. Lightning suddenly wreathed his free hand, and Malice's eyes widened in surprise as the energy struck her, sending her staggering back. But instead of pressing his advantage with more dark side attacks, Kaelin immediately shifted to a different energy, the same healing power he'd practiced on Dromund Fells. He reached out to the corrupted children around the arena, his touch in the Force, offering them a glimpse of peace they hadn't felt since Malise found them. "What are you?" Malise demanded, circling him warily as she tried to understand what she was facing. "Something new," Kaelin replied, and this time when he attacked, he flowed seamlessly between combat forms, the aggressive strikes of Juyo powered by controlled passion, followed immediately by the defensive perfection of Soresu guided by serene focus. Lightning danced around his blade one moment, protective barriers shimmered around him the next. Malice was skilled, but she'd been trained to fight Jedi or rival Sith. She had no defense against an opponent who could use every aspect of the Force without being controlled by any of them. When she tried to match his lightning, he healed the damage faster than she could inflict it. When she attempted to use Jedi techniques against him, he responded with Sith aggression that overwhelmed her guard. The end came when she overcommitted to a powerful strike, certain that her superior dark side mastery would carry the day. Kalen caught her blade with his own, then placed his free hand against her chest. For a moment, she expected death, either from Sith lightning or some other dark power. Instead, he flooded her with the same healing energy he'd offered the children, not to cure physical wounds, but to touch the part of her that remembered who she'd been before the Sith found her. For just an instant, her yellow eyes cleared, and she saw what she'd become. She whispered, then collapsed as the revelation overwhelmed her. She was still alive, but the connection to the dark side that had sustained her was severed. Without it, she was just a broken woman who had caused immeasurable harm. Kalen turned to address the stunned crowd, young dark side adepts and crime bosses alike. She offered you power, but at the cost of your souls. I offer you choice. The power is still there. The Force flows through all of you, but you can choose how to use it. He demonstrated, calling up healing energy in one hand, while lightning crackled in the other. Light and dark, passion and peace, strength and compassion. You don't have to choose just one. You can be more than what either the Jedi or Sith would make you. Several of the young fighters stepped forward, their eyes no longer glowing with Sith fire, but bright with possibility. Behind them, some of the crime bosses exchanged meaningful glances. They had just witnessed something unprecedented, and they were already calculating how this new player might change the balance of power in the underworld. As Kalen prepared to leave, the Rhodian crime boss approached him. That was educational. Tell me, Grey Jedi, for that's what you are, isn't it? Do you plan to make a habit of this sort of intervention? Only when the galaxy needs it, Kalen replied, but even as he spoke, he could sense other disturbances in the Force. Other Sith operations, other corrupted situations that the traditional Jedi were ill-equipped to handle. Though I suspect that may be more often than any of us would like. The crime boss nodded slowly, then made a gesture that was part bow, part business arrangement. Then House Voss has allies in the shadows, should you ever need them. As Kalen walked away from the arena, he reflected on what had just happened. He had faced a Sith Lord and won not through superior power or technique, but by embodying something entirely new. The expressions on those young faces, the moment when Malice had remembered her humanity, the crime boss's offer of alliance, all of it suggested that his path might have consequences far beyond what he'd imagined. The galaxy was vast, and there were countless others like those children-lost souls caught between the rigid light of the Jedi and the consuming darkness of the Sith. Perhaps it was time they had another option. Perhaps it was time for the Grey Path to truly begin. Chapter 4. The Council's Judgment. The Jedi Temple felt different to Kalen as he walked its halls under escort. Where once he had moved freely among his brothers and sisters, now he was treated as a potential threat. The two Jedi flanking him masters Ki-Adi-Mundi and Kit Fisto maintained respectful distances, but their hands remained near their lightsabers. Word of his confrontation with Darth Malice had reached Coruscant within days. The criminal underworld had many eyes and ears, and the story of a Grey Jedi, who wielded both light and dark, had spread like wildfire through the galaxy's cantinas and black markets. The Council had summoned him immediately. Kalen Voss. Master Windu's voice echoed through the circular chamber as he entered. The 12 members of the Jedi Council sat in their traditional positions, but there was a tension in the Force that hadn't been there during his last visit. You stand accused of falling to the dark side, corrupting Force-sensitive youth, and undermining the principles of the Jedi Order. Accused by whom? Kalen asked, standing in the center of the chamber with his hands clasped behind his back. He could feel their collective scrutiny like a physical weight. "Reports have reached us," Master Aayla Secura said, her voice carefully neutral. "Witnesses claim you used Sith lightning in combat, that you've gathered followers who practice dark side techniques." "The witnesses are correct," Kalen said simply, and felt the ripple of shock that passed through the council. "I did use lightning. I did teach those children to touch the dark side without being consumed by it." Master Windu leaned forward, his expression grave. "Then you confirm that you have fallen. The question becomes whether you can be redeemed, or whether you represent too great a threat to—" "Fallen, have I?" The voice that interrupted was ancient and amused. Master Yoda struck his Geimer stick against the floor twice, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. "Sense much anger in you, do I, young Kalen? Much hatred, consumed by the dark side, are you?" Kalen met the ancient master's eyes. "I feel anger, Master Yoda. I feel the loss of my family every day, but I am not consumed by it. I choose when to use these feelings and when to set them aside." "Impossible," Master Windu stated flatly. "The dark side is corruption. It feeds on emotion until there is nothing left but hunger for power. You cannot simply choose when to use it." "May I demonstrate?" Kalen asked. The request sent another wave of tension through the chamber. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, and he saw Master Shakti's hand move toward her lightsaber. "Dangerous, this could be," Yoda mused, but there was curiosity in his ancient eyes. "Yet sense deception in you, I do not. Proceed, but careful we will be." Kalen closed his eyes and centered himself in the Force. First, he reached for the light, the peace and serenity that had been his companions for 17 years as a Jedi. Healing energy flowed from him, warming the chamber and causing several flowering plants in the temple gardens far below to bloom out of season. The council members' expressions softened as they felt the familiar, comforting presence of the light side. Then, without transitioning or internal struggle, he shifted to the dark side. Lightning crackled around his fingers, not wild or chaotic, but controlled and purposeful. The force around him took on the edge of barely contained passion, but there was no malevolence in it, only power waiting to be directed. What shocked the council most was that he maintained perfect emotional equilibrium throughout both demonstrations. His breathing remained steady, his posture calm, his presence in the Force balanced despite channeling energies that should have been antithetical to each other. "Fascinating," Master Ki-Adi-Mundi whispered. "It's as if you're treating them as different tools rather than opposing philosophies." "Because that's exactly what they are," Kalen said, allowing both energies to fade. "The Force isn't good or evil, Masters. It simply is. We assign moral weight to different ways of accessing it, but the energy itself is neutral." "Heresy," Master Windu said sharply. "The dark side is corruption, plain and simple. It twists those who touch it, makes them lose control," Kalen finished, "because they surrender their will to it. They let passion become rage, let anger become hatred, let power become an end in itself. But what if someone refused to surrender? What if they used these emotions as tools while maintaining their moral center?" Master Yoda was silent for a long moment, his eyes closed as he reached out through the Force to examine Kalen more deeply. When he opened them again, his expression was troubled but not condemnatory. "Changed you have," the ancient master said slowly, "but fallen to darkness. See this? I do not. Dangerous your path is, but corrupt. He shook his head. Corrupt, you are not. This is unprecedented, Master Plo Koon said, his mechanical breathing filling the silence. Our entire understanding of the Force suggests that what he's describing should be impossible. Perhaps our understanding is incomplete, Master Luminara Unduli suggested carefully. The ancient texts speak of balance, though we've always interpreted that as choosing the light over the dark. The ancient texts speak of the Chosen One, who will bring balance to the Force, Master Windu corrected, not of individuals who practice both sides. And what if they're the same thing? Kalen asked. What if true balance isn't the triumph of light over dark, but the integration of both into something greater? The debate that followed was heated but civil. Some council members, like Masters Windu and Sakura, remained convinced that any contact with the dark side led inevitably to corruption. Others, like Masters Yoda and Plo Koon, were intrigued by the philosophical implications of what Kalen represented. The younglings on Nar Shaddaa, Master Shakti said during a lull in the argument. What has become of them? They're learning, Kalen replied. Some have chosen to follow my teachings. Others have returned to their families or found new paths entirely. None have fallen to the dark side as the Sith understand it. Because you've shown them another way, Master Kit Fisto said thoughtfully. A middle path between our rigid serenity and the Sith's chaotic passion. The middle path leads nowhere, Master Windu insisted. It is compromise, and the Force demands commitment. Does it? Yoda asked quietly. Or demand understanding the Force does? Wisdom, beyond what comfortable growth our old ways have become. The ancient master rose from his chair, his Geimer stick clicking against the floor as he approached Kalen. A test, I propose. Prove that dangerous you are not. Prove that this gray path serve the light can. What kind of test? Kalen asked. Sith stirring in the unknown regions, our scouts report. Traditional methods, ineffective they have been. But you understand their ways while remaining uncorrupted, you claim. Show us. Master Windu looked as if he wanted to object, but Yoda continued before he could speak. Conditional your freedom will be. Succeed in turning Sith operations against themselves, and reconsider your place, the Council will. Fail, or fall to darkness. You'll do what needs to be done, Kalen finished. I understand, Master Yoda, and I accept. As the council session ended and Kalen was escorted to temporary quarters to await his assignment, he reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, he would have been horrified at the idea of infiltrating Sith operations using their own methods. Now, it felt like the natural next step in his evolution. The Jedi feared what they didn't understand, but Master Yoda's willingness to consider new possibilities gave him hope. Perhaps the Order could evolve, just as he had. Perhaps the rigid dogma that had served them for millennia could be expanded to meet new challenges. Or perhaps he was destined to walk this path alone, building something entirely new from the ashes of the old ways. Either way, he would prove that the gray path wasn't just possible, it was necessary. The galaxy was changing, and the Jedi would need to change with it or risk becoming irrelevant in the face of threats they couldn't comprehend. His family's death had taught him that some evils required more than passive resistance to defeat. Sometimes, to truly serve the light, one had to be willing to walk through darkness, not as a Sith would, surrendering to its power, but as something new entirely. Something that both light and dark would learn to fear. Chapter 5. Gathering the Gray. The cantina on Ord Mantell buzzed with the usual mix of smugglers, bounty hunters, and other assorted criminals, but Kalen's attention was focused on the woman sitting alone in the corner booth. Zara Thane nursed her drink with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to let her guard down, even in her sleep. The force around her was conflicted light and dark energies swirling in patterns that spoke of internal struggle. She had been a Jedi Knight once, before the incident on Ryloth that ended her career. The official records were sealed, but Kaelin had pieced together the truth from whispered conversations and careful investigation. A slaver ring had been torturing Twi'lek children to break their spirits before sale. When negotiations failed and the slavers threatened to execute their captives, Zara had done what any compassionate being would do. She had acted. The Force lightning that killed 3 slavers and freed dozens of children was also what ended her time with the Jedi Order. "Zara Thane," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. She didn't look up from her drink, but her hand shifted slightly toward the blaster on her hip. "Whatever you're selling." "I'm not buying," she said. Her voice carried the weariness of someone who had been running from her past for too long. "I'm not selling anything. I'm offering something." He placed a small holographic projector on the table and activated it. The image that appeared showed the children from Nar Shaddaa not as they had been under Darth Malice's influence, but as they were now. Healthy, learning, practicing Force techniques that somehow managed to be both powerful and peaceful. Zara looked up for the first time, her green eyes sharp with intelligence and carefully controlled hope. "Who are you? Someone who understands what it's like to use lightning to save innocent lives and be condemned for it." Her hand moved away from her blaster, but her posture remained tense. "The Jedi don't forget. They don't forgive. And they certainly don't recruit fallen knights for secret missions." "I'm not a Jedi anymore," Kaelin said simply. "I'm something else, something new. And I think you could be too." Over the next hour, he told her his story. Not all of it. The pain of losing his family was still too raw to share with someone he'd just met, but enough to explain how he'd come to understand that the Force was larger than either Jedi or Sith philosophies could contain. When he demonstrated his abilities, switching seamlessly between healing energy and controlled lightning, her eyes widened with something beyond surprise. "It's possible," she whispered. "You can actually do both without falling." "The Jedi taught us that touching the dark side meant corruption," Kaelin said, "but they were wrong about the mechanism. It's not the dark side that corrupts. It's losing control to any emotion, whether it's rage or fear or even misguided compassion. True balance comes from maintaining choice." Zara was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I've spent 3 years believing I was damned, that saving those children marked me as something evil. You saved innocent lives using whatever tools were available. The method doesn't matter. The choice does." She looked up at him again, and this time there was steel in her gaze. "What are you asking of me?" "Help me build something new. A place where Force users like us can learn to serve the light without being bound by dogma that serves no one." Their second recruit found them. Kaelin was returning from a supply run 2 weeks later when he sensed a disturbance in the Force near their temporary camp on the asteroid, where Zara had been practicing the techniques he'd learned from Revan's spirit. The presence was dark but conflicted, moving with the predatory grace of someone trained in Sith combat forms. He found a young man sitting by their campfire, calmly cooking food he'd apparently brought with him. Despite his relaxed posture, everything about him screamed danger, from the red lightsaber clipped to his belt to the Sith tattoos that covered his shaved scalp. "Dex Corrin," the man said without looking up from the fire. "Former apprentice to Darth Vexus. Emphasis on former." Zara emerged from behind a rock outcropping, her own lightsaber drawn but not ignited. "He's been here for an hour. Says he wants to join us." "Join us in what?" Kaelin asked, though he was already reaching out through the Force to assess the stranger's intentions. What he found surprised him, beneath the Sith training and dark side conditioning, was a core of genuine remorse and desperate hope. "In proving that there's more than one way to walk away from the Sith," Dex said, finally looking up. His eyes were yellow with Sith corruption, but they held an intelligence and self-awareness that set him apart from the mindless fanatics Kaelin usually associated with the dark side. I've been tracking rumors about a gray Jedi who can use both sides of the Force. Figured if anyone could teach me how to change without giving up everything I've learned, it would be you." "And why would you want to change?" Zara asked suspiciously. "The Sith offer power, freedom from restraint. What could we possibly give you that's better?" Dex's expression darkened, and for a moment his control slipped enough that the air around him began to crackle with suppressed energy. "My master ordered me to torture information out of a prisoner, a Republic senator who had been captured during a raid. When I hesitated, just hesitated, she killed him anyway, and told me that mercy was weakness." He stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of their small camp. "I've killed in combat. I've done things that would horrify most civilized beings, but torture for its own sake, cruelty as a teaching tool, I couldn't stomach it anymore." "So you ran," Kalen said. "I killed her." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. "My own master used everything she'd taught me to destroy her, then fled before her allies could retaliate. Now I'm hunted by the Sith for betrayal, and would be executed by the Jedi for my past crimes. You're my only option." Kalen studied the young man for a long moment. The risk was enormous. Sith conditioning ran deep, and Dex's fall could endanger them all. But there was something in his story that resonated. The moment when conscience overcame conditioning, when someone chose to reject evil despite the cost. "Show me your technique," he said finally. What followed was one of the most intense sparring sessions of Kalen's life. Dex fought like a true Sith aggressive, overwhelming, channeling his emotions into devastating attacks that would have crippled most Jedi. But he also showed restraint at crucial moments, pulling strikes that could have been killing blows, and demonstrating a tactical awareness that spoke of natural talent rather than just Sith brutality. When it was over, both men were breathing hard and covered in sweat, but Dex's eyes had lost some of their yellow taint. "Interesting," Kalen said. "You use Sith techniques, but you're not consumed by Sith philosophy. You've already started walking away from the dark side without realizing it. Is that even possible? You're living proof that it is. The question is whether you're willing to learn how to walk towards something better." Their third member came to them through an encrypted message that appeared on Zara's datapad during a supply run to Nar Shaddaa. The message was written in an ancient script that took Kalen 3 days to translate, and when he finally decoded it, he understood why. "The Jensari," he said, showing the translation to his companions. "They're Force users who've been practicing a form of balance for centuries, hidden on a world called Swarby 7. "Never heard of them," Dex said, but his expression was thoughtful. Though some of the older Sith texts mentioned an order that walked between light and dark. Most Sith considered them heretics. Most Jedi would too, Zara added, if they knew about them at all. The journey to Swarby 7 took them through hyperspace lanes that weren't on any official charts, following navigation data hidden in the Jensari message. When they finally arrived at the hidden world, they found a small community of Force users who had indeed been practicing their own form of balance for generations. Elder Naya greeted them at the landing platform, an ancient human woman whose presence in the Force was unlike anything Kalen had encountered. She radiated wisdom and power, but it was power held in perfect equilibrium. Light and dark, emotion and serenity, passion and peace, all existing in harmony within her. "Kalen Voss," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years, "the one who calls himself Gray. We have been expecting you." "Expecting me?" "The Force shows us many things, young one, including visions of a new order rising from the ashes of old conflicts. You are the catalyst, but you cannot do this alone." Over the following week, Elder Naya shared the Jensari philosophy with them. Where the Jedi sought to suppress emotion and the Sith sought to be ruled by it, the Jensari taught integration. They learned to transform negative emotions into positive action, to use passion in service of compassion, to find strength in balance rather than extremes. The armor we wear, Naya explained, gesturing to the distinctive Gensare gear that was both practical protection and philosophical statement, represents our understanding that we must be prepared for all aspects of existence, light and dark, peace and war, creation and destruction. When it came time to leave, Elder Naya made an unexpected announcement. "I will come with you. Elder, surely the Gensari need..." The Gensari have survived in hiding for centuries, but survival is not enough anymore. The galaxy is changing, and if our philosophy is to have meaning beyond our small community, it must be tested in the wider universe. She smiled and suddenly looked decades younger. Besides, an old woman grows tired of hiding from the galaxy. It's time to help shape it instead. As their ship lifted off from Swarby 7, Kalen looked at his companions, former Jedi, former Sith, ancient guardian of forgotten wisdom, and felt something he hadn't experienced since before his family's death. Hope for the future. They were no longer individual outcasts struggling with their own demons. They were the foundation of something new. "So what do we call ourselves?" Zara asked, as they plotted their course back to the main galaxy. "The Grey Order," Kalen said without hesitation. "Those who serve the light while walking through darkness. Those who understand that true strength comes not from choosing a side, but from transcending the need to choose at all." Dex smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, his eyes showed no trace of Sith corruption. "I like it. When do we start changing the galaxy?" "We already have," Elder Naya said quietly. "Every choice we make, every person we teach, every moment we prove that another way is possible. We change the galaxy. The question is whether it will change fast enough to face what's coming." Through the viewport, the stars beckoned with infinite possibilities. Somewhere out there, Sith Lords were gathering their strength, and Jedi Masters were clinging to traditions that might no longer serve them. But now, there was a third option taking shape among the stars. The Grey Path was no longer just an individual journey. It was becoming something much larger, a new hope for a galaxy that had been trapped between light and darkness for too long. Chapter 6. The Sith Gambit. The emergency session of the Jedi Council was already in progress when the priority transmission from the Republic military reached them. Master Windu's expression grew increasingly grim as he absorbed the intelligence report, while Master Yoda's ears drooped with concern. 3 simultaneous attacks, Windu announced to the assembled council. Sulast, Bothawi, and Kashyyyk. Industrial targets, civilian populations at risk. Republic forces are requesting immediate Jedi assistance. "Stretched thin, our resources are," Yoda observed, his Geimer stick tapping nervously against the floor. 3 strike teams, require we would, but available. Only 8 masters we have, and spread across the galaxy our knights are. Master Ki-Adi-Mundi pulled up a holographic display of the galaxy, showing Jedi positions and estimated travel times. Even if we recall our nearest forces, we can only respond to 2 of the 3 attacks with any meaningful strength. The third falls, Master Windu finished grimly. Unacceptable casualties, but we must prioritize based on strategic value. In orbit above Coruscant, aboard a modified light freighter that served as the Grey Order's mobile headquarters, Kalen felt the disturbance in the Force like a physical blow. The suffering, the fear, the coordinated malevolence behind the attacks. It painted a clear picture of Sith strategy. "They're testing the Jedi response time," Elder Naya said from her position at the ship's meditation alcove. Her ancient eyes were closed, but her consciousness was reaching across the galaxy to touch the conflicts. This isn't about conquest. It's about proving that the traditional methods are inadequate. Zara looked up from the tactical display she'd been studying. 3 targets, each requiring different approaches. Sullust is heavily industrialized lots of civilian workers in underground facilities. Bothawi has that new sensor net installation the Republic's been building. And Kashyyyk is where the Wookiees have been harboring Jedi artifacts in their sacred groves. Dex finished, his knowledge of Sith intelligence operations proving valuable once again. My former master mentioned it during planning sessions. The Sith want those artifacts, but more than that, they want to prove they can strike at the heart of Jedi-allied worlds. Kalen studied the data streams coming in from Republic monitoring stations. The attacks were coordinated, but not identical. Each showed hallmarks of different Sith lords, different approaches to warfare. It's a gambit. They're forcing the Jedi to choose which worlds to save, knowing that any choice will result in massive casualties somewhere. Traditional Jedi doctrine would require consultation, meditation, careful weighing of options, Elder Naya said, opening her eyes. By the time they've made their decision and deployed their forces, thousands will be dead. But we're not bound by traditional doctrine, Zara said, understanding immediately where this was leading. No, we're not. Kalen moved to the ship's communication console. We can be in 3 places at once. Small teams, unconventional tactics, using the Sith's own methods against them. Dex grinned, and there was something predatory in his expression that would have alarmed the Jedi Council, but reassured his current companions. You want to fight like Sith to beat the Sith. I want to fight smart, Kalen corrected. Zara, you take Sullust. The underground facilities will limit lightsaber combat, but your technical skills and ability to switch between healing and combat abilities will serve you well with civilian rescue operations. Understood, she said, already moving toward her personal gear. What about backup? You'll coordinate with local resistance cells. Use their knowledge of the facility layouts, but don't reveal your full capabilities until absolutely necessary. He turned to Dex. Bothawi is yours. The Sith there will be expecting conventional Jedi tactics defense, negotiation, minimal aggression. Give them the opposite. Overwhelming offense. Strike at their leadership. Use their own aggressive tactics against them. Dex nodded. I can work with that. What about you? Kashyyyk. The sacred groves will require a more nuanced approach. Kalen's expression grew distant as he contemplated what lay ahead. Elder Naya, I need you to coordinate from here. Monitor all 3 operations, provide tactical support, and be ready to redirect resources if any of us get in over our heads. And if the Jedi Council objects to our intervention? Zara asked. They can object after we've saved lives, Kalen said grimly. Move out. The battle for Sullust began before Zara's ship even landed. As she descended through the planet's sulfurous atmosphere, she could see the industrial complex under siege Sith fighters, strafing the main facility while dropships deployed troops to secure key positions. The defenders were putting up fierce resistance, but they were being systematically overwhelmed. Zara's approach was unlike anything the Sith commanders had planned for. Instead of announcing her presence with a dramatic lightsaber duel, she infiltrated through the facility's ventilation systems, using her technical expertise to disable security systems and her force abilities to navigate spaces no normal being could traverse. Her first rescue operation saved 30 workers trapped in a collapsed section of the mining facility. Instead of using traditional Jedi healing techniques, she combined light side restoration with precisely controlled force lightning to restart the hearts of workers who had been overcome by toxic gases. The survivors stared at her in amazement. No Jedi they'd ever heard of could do what they'd just witnessed. Meanwhile, she was systematically dismantling the Sith operation from within. Using techniques Kalen had taught her, she influenced the minds of Sith troops, turning their own paranoia and aggression against each other. By the time the Sith commanders realized what was happening, their carefully coordinated assault had devolved into friendly fire incidents and tactical confusion. On Bothawi, Dex was taking a more direct approach. His ship screamed out of hyperspace directly into the middle of the Sith fleet, shields blazing as he absorbed fire from multiple directions. The Sith commanders, expecting to face measured Jedi caution, instead found themselves dealing with someone who fought like one of their own. Dex's lightsaber work was pure Sith aggression, overwhelming, relentless, designed to intimidate as much as injure. But unlike a true Sith, he retained tactical awareness and emotional control. When he cut through the bridge crew of the lead assault ship, he immediately switched to force healing to save the Republic personnel who had been taken hostage. The psychological impact on the remaining Sith forces was devastating. Here was someone who could out-Sith the Sith while maintaining moral principles they couldn't comprehend. The sensor installation was saved not through defensive tactics, but through a preemptive strike that crippled the Sith fleet's ability to coordinate their attack. Within 4 hours, Dex had turned what should have been a massacre into a rout. Kashyyyk presented the most complex challenge. The Sith forces there weren't just trying to capture or destroy, they were specifically seeking the ancient Jedi artifacts hidden in the Roshar Tree cities. More importantly, they were led by someone Kalen recognized from his research, Darth Reaper, a Sith Lord known for his ability to corrupt sacred sites and turn them into nexuses of dark side power. Kalen's approach combined elements from all his training. He worked with the Wookiee defenders, using their intimate knowledge of the forest canopy to conduct a guerrilla campaign that kept the main Sith force off balance. But he also infiltrated their command structure, using Sith techniques to influence their commanders and feed them false information. The climactic confrontation took place in the most sacred of the Roshar groves, where ancient Jedi had once meditated and left echoes of their wisdom in the living wood. Darth Reaper had already begun the ritual to corrupt the site when Kalen arrived. "A Jedi," Reaper sneered, his crimson lightsaber casting bloody shadows among the massive tree trunks. "Come to watch as I turn your precious sanctuary into a wound in the Force?" "Not a Jedi," Kalen replied, igniting his own blade. "Something you won't understand." The duel that followed was unlike anything the Grove had witnessed. Reaper fought with pure Sith fury, trying to overwhelm his opponent with raw dark side power. But Kalen matched him technique for technique, then began switching between light and dark side abilities in ways that shattered Reaper's understanding of Force combat. When Reaper summoned lightning, Kalen absorbed it and channeled it back as healing energy that restored the corrupted grove. When the Sith Lord tried to use the dark side to influence the battle, Kalen countered with light side techniques that purified the very air around them. Most devastating of all, he began using Reaper's own emotions against him, not to corrupt or destroy, but to show him the futility of his path. The battle ended when Kalen, in a moment of perfect balance, channeled both aspects of the Force simultaneously. Light and dark energy flowed through him in harmony, creating a resonance that shattered Reaper's connection to the dark side without destroying the man himself. The Sith Lord collapsed, his yellow eyes clearing for the first time in decades, as he remembered who he had been before the darkness claimed him. The aftermath was swift and decisive. All 3 Sith operations had been neutralized with minimal casualties and maximum psychological impact. The galaxy's criminal networks buzzed with stories of a new kind of Force user ones who could outfight Sith Lords while saving civilians, who used dark side techniques in service of the light, who seemed to be everything the traditional orders were not. But it was the Republic military's analysis that carried the most weight. Their report to the Senate was unambiguous. Conventional Jedi response would have resulted in the loss of at least one of the 3 worlds and massive casualties on the others. The Grey Order's intervention had saved hundreds of thousands of lives through tactics that neither pure Jedi nor pure Sith could have employed. The transmission that reached the Jedi Temple was terse and official, but its implications were staggering. 3 simultaneous Sith operations had been defeated by 4 individuals using methods that challenged everything the Order thought it knew about the Force. Master Yoda sat in his private chambers long into the night, contemplating what this meant for the future. The Grey Path was no longer theoretical. It was proving itself in the crucible of real conflict. And if Kalen Voss was right about the nature of balance, then the Jedi Order itself might need to evolve or risk becoming irrelevant in the face of threats it couldn't comprehend. Outside his window, the lights of Coruscant glittered like stars, each one representing lives that might depend on the choices made in the days to come. Change was inevitable. The only question was whether it would come through wisdom or catastrophe. In the depths of space, the Grey Order's ship set course for their next destination, carrying with them the proof that another way was not only possible, but necessary. The galaxy was vast, and there were countless others who needed to see that the ancient conflict between light and dark was not the only choice available to those who wielded the Force. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Apprentice's Betrayal. The moon, Yavin 8, had been the perfect sanctuary for the Grey Order. Hidden in the shadow of the gas giant's more famous fourth moon, it offered isolation, ancient ruins to study, and Force-sensitive crystals that resonated with their balanced approach to the Force. Over the past 6 months, their small order had grown not in numbers, which remained deliberately limited, but in understanding and capability. Kalen stood in the main training chamber they'd carved from the moon's ancient temple ruins, watching as a group of younglings practiced the fundamental exercises of the Grey Path. These children had come to them from across the galaxy. Some refugees from Sith corruption, like those they'd saved on Nar Shaddaa, others who had been rejected by the Jedi Order for being too old or too emotional to begin traditional training. "Feel the Force flow through you," Elder Naya instructed a young Twi'lek girl who was struggling to balance healing energy in one hand, with controlled lightning in the other. Do not fight the emotions that arise. Acknowledge them, understand them, but do not let them control your actions. The girl Seattle, rescued from slavers on Ryloth, had shown remarkable progress. Where traditional Jedi training would have required her to suppress the anger from her traumatic past, the Grey Path taught her to transform that anger into determination to protect others. Her lightning crackled not with rage, but with controlled purpose. "She's ready for advanced combat training," Zara observed, moving to stand beside Kalen. Her own journey had been remarkable to witness. The guilt and self-doubt that had plagued her since leaving the Jedi Order had transformed into serene confidence. She was no longer a fallen Jedi, but something entirely new. "They all are," Kalan agreed, but there was concern in his voice. "Perhaps too ready. I sometimes wonder if we're moving too fast, building something too visible." His concern proved prophetic. The attack came at dawn, when the temple's defenses were configured for meditation rather than war. Kalen felt the disturbance in the Force moments before the first ships appeared in the moon's atmosphere, a sensation like ice water flooding his veins as he recognized the dark side signatures of the approaching vessels. "Sith fleet, bearing down on our position," Dex's voice crackled over the comm system from the temple's sensor array. But there was something wrong with his tone. Too calm, too controlled, as if he'd been expecting this. The first wave of fighters screamed over the temple complex, their laser cannons tearing through the carefully maintained gardens where the younglings often meditated. Kalen ignited his lightsaber and began deflecting incoming fire, but his mind was racing. How had the Sith found them? Their location was known only to him. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. "Dex," he whispered, and the name carried all the weight of betrayal and bitter recognition. The main assault force landed in the temple's central courtyard. Sith troopers in black armor, flanked by red-robed apprentices, and led by a figure in ornate battle dress that could only be a Sith Lord. But it was the person standing beside the Lord that confirmed Kalen's worst fears. Dex Corrin walked with the Sith forces, his yellow eyes blazing with renewed corruption as he surveyed the temple he had helped to build. When his gaze met Kalen's across the courtyard, there was no shame in his expression, only cold satisfaction. "Master Kalen Voss," the Sith Lord called out, his voice amplified by dark side techniques to carry across the battlefield. "I am Darth Vortex, and I have come to claim what your misguided apprentice promised me, the secrets of your gray path, and the lives of all who practice it." The battle erupted across multiple fronts simultaneously. Zara led a desperate evacuation of the younglings toward the temple's hidden escape routes, her lightsaber dancing between blue healing energy and crackling lightning as she cut through Sith forces. Elder Naya took position in the main hall, her ancient knowledge allowing her to turn the temple's own defensive systems against the invaders. But it was Kalen who faced the most personal battle. As Sith forces swarmed through the complex, he found himself confronted not just by Darth Vortex, but by the young man he had trusted, trained, and come to think of as family. "Why?" Kalen asked, as their lightsabers clashed in the temple's meditation chamber. Around them, ancient murals depicting the balance of the Force seemed to watch their conflict with stone eyes. "Because I was weak," Dex replied, his fighting style now purely Sith-aggressive, overwhelming, fueled by emotions he had learned to control under the gray path. "Because I let your teachings make me soft. Because I forgot what real power feels like." Their duel was brutal and personal. Dex knew all of Kalen's techniques, had trained beside him for months, understood the philosophical foundations of every move. But Kalen had taught him only part of what the gray path could achieve. Where Dex had reverted to pure Sith aggression, Kalen maintained the balance that made him truly formidable. "You're lying," Kalen said as he deflected a vicious overhead strike. "This isn't about power or weakness. This is about fear." "Fear?" Dex laughed, but there was a hysteria in the sound that confirmed Kalen's suspicion. "What do I have to fear from a failed philosophy that produces nothing but—" "Fear of belonging to something good," Kalen continued, pressing his attack with a combination of Jedi serenity and Sith precision. "Fear that you might actually be worthy of redemption. Fear that the man you could become might be better than the monster you were." For just a moment, Dex's assault faltered. In that instant, Kalen saw past the renewed Sith conditioning to the young man who had sat by their campfire and talked about finding a better path. But the moment passed, and when Dex resumed his attack, it was with redoubled fury. The battle's turning point came when Seattle the young Twi'lek, who had been practicing balance exercises that morning, appeared in the chamber's doorway. She had been evacuating with the other younglings, but something had brought her back. "Master Dex!" she called out, her voice cutting through the sound of clashing lightsabers. "Why are you fighting Master Kalen?" Dex froze, his weapon still locked against Kalen's blade. For a heartbeat, his yellow eyes cleared as he looked at the child he had helped to train, the child who had looked up to him as a teacher and protector. He began, and in that moment of hesitation, Darth Vortex struck. The Sith Lord's Force lightning caught Dex from behind, not to aid him, but to eliminate a weakness. "Pathetic," Vortex snarled. "Even corrupted, you remain contaminated by their softness." Dex screamed as the dark side energy tore through him, but instead of falling, he did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. He turned the lightning back on its source, channeling it through techniques Kalen had taught him not to destroy Vortex, but to sever his connection to the dark side corruption that had reclaimed him. "Seattle, run!" Dex shouted as he grappled with the Sith Lord, both of them wreathed in crackling energy. "Get to the escape ships!" But the child stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she watched her teacher sacrifice himself for her safety. It was Zara who appeared behind her, scooping up the girl and racing toward the evacuation routes. The explosion that followed destroyed the meditation chamber and half the temple complex. When the dust settled, both Dex and Darth Vortex were gone, their final battle having consumed them both in force energy that left nothing but scorched stone and the lingering echo of redemption. In the aftermath, as the survivors gathered at their emergency rendezvous point on a neighboring asteroid, Kalen found himself holding Dex's lightsaber, the weapon his former student had somehow managed to throw clear in his final moments. The young man who had betrayed them had also saved them, choosing in the end to die as a Grey rather than live as a Sith. "He came back to himself at the end," Elder Naya said quietly, as they watched the funeral pyre they had built from debris of their destroyed home. The Sith conditioning was broken when he saw what his betrayal would cost the children. "I should have seen the signs," Kalen said, his voice heavy with grief and guilt. "Should have known that his redemption was incomplete." "Redemption is never complete," Zara replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's a choice we make every day, in every moment. Today, when it mattered most, Dex chose to be the man you believed he could become." The attack had cost them their sanctuary, their accumulated resources, and lives they could not afford to lose. But it had also taught them something crucial about the path they had chosen. The Grey Way was not easier than the traditional paths. It required constant vigilance against corruption from within, as well as attacks from without. As they prepared to leave the Yavin system and find a new home for their order, Kalen made a decision that would reshape their approach going forward. They could no longer afford to operate in isolation. The Sith would always be able to find them, to exploit the doubts and fears of those who walked the narrow line between light and dark. It was time to step out of the shadows and openly challenge the paradigm that had trapped the galaxy in endless conflict for millennia. It was time to prove that the Grey Path was not just an alternative to the ancient war between Jedi and Sith, but the key to ending it entirely. The first step would be the most dangerous, an alliance with the very Jedi Order that had expelled him. But if they were to face the growing Sith threat, they would need to work together, whether the Council approved or not. The Grey Order's hidden phase was over. Now came the test of whether the galaxy was ready for what they truly represented. Hope for a future beyond the endless cycle of light and dark, conflict and betrayal that had defined the Force for too long. Dex's sacrifice had shown them that redemption was possible even in the darkest moments. Now they had to prove that same truth on a galactic scale. Chapter 8. Alliance of Necessity. The meeting chamber on Cloud City was chosen for its neutrality, neither Jedi nor Republic territory, but a place where desperate times might allow for desperate measures. Through the transparent steel windows, the gas giant's swirling clouds created an ever-shifting backdrop of orange and purple that seemed to mirror the uncertainty of the gathering itself. Kalen stood at one end of the oval table, flanked by Zara and Elder Naya. The survivors of their order, now numbering only 8 full members and 12 younglings, waited aboard their ship in Cloud City's docking bay, ready to flee if this unprecedented meeting went wrong. At the other end of the table sat 3 members of the Jedi Council, Master Yoda, whose ancient eyes held more curiosity than condemnation, Master Plo Koon, whose mechanical breathing was the only sound in the tense silence, and Master Kit Fisto, whose usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by careful neutrality. Between them sat Admiral Tarkin, representing the Republic military, and Chancellor Palpatine, via hologram, a last-minute addition that had made everyone uncomfortable for reasons none of them could quite articulate. "Unprecedented this gathering is," Yoda said finally, his Geimer stick tapping against the polished floor. "But unprecedented, too, the threat we face. Speak freely, you may, Kalen Voss." "Listen, we will." Kalen activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy's current strategic situation. Red markers indicated confirmed Sith operations, yellow showed suspected dark side activity, and blue represented successful Republic or Jedi interventions. The pattern was stark and undeniable. The red was spreading faster than the blue could contain it. "The Sith have changed their strategy," he began, his voice carrying the weight of recent losses. "They are no longer operating as scattered individual lords pursuing personal power. Someone or something is coordinating their efforts on a galactic scale." "Intelligence reports confirm this assessment," Admiral Tarkin added, his crisp Imperial accent cutting through the room. "We've identified at least 12 major Sith operations in the past 6 months, each one designed to test our response capabilities and stretch our resources thin." Master Plo Koon leaned forward. "And you believe traditional Jedi methods are insufficient to meet this threat?" "I know they are," Kalen replied bluntly. "Respectfully, Masters, the Jedi Order excels at maintaining peace. But you're not equipped for this kind of warfare. The Sith are using psychological operations, infiltration, corruption of local populations tactics that require understanding their mindset without being consumed by it. Yet your own methods carry great risk," Kit Fisto observed. "The attack on your sanctuary proves that walking close to darkness can compromise even the most well-intentioned." Kalen's expression tightened at the reminder of Dex's betrayal, but he nodded. "Every path carries risks, Master Fisto. The question is whether those risks are justified by the results." Zara stepped forward, activating her own section of the holographic display. "Since forming the Grey Order, we've neutralized 17 Sith operations with 0 civilian casualties and minimal Republic military losses. Compare that to traditional responses. The data was uncomfortable but undeniable. Where Jedi-led operations typically resulted in protracted conflicts and significant collateral damage, the Grey Order's interventions were swift, surgical, and devastatingly effective." "Impressive, these results are," Yoda admitted. "But at what cost? Feel the darkness in you. I do, young Zara. Changed. You all have been." "Yes, we have." Elder Naya spoke for the first time, her ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We have become what the galaxy needs us to be. The Gensarai learned it long ago that purity is a luxury civilizations cannot always afford." Chancellor Palpatine's hologram flickered as he joined the conversation. "The Senate is most interested in any innovations that might protect Republic citizens. Perhaps you could elaborate on your specific methodologies?" Something in the Chancellor's tone made Kalen uneasy, but he pressed on. "We use the Sith's own psychological tactics against them. Infiltration, misdirection, turning their paranoia into a weapon. But we do it without surrendering our moral center." "And how, exactly, do you maintain that moral center while employing such dark methods?" Master Plo Koon asked. "By never losing sight of why we fight," Kalen replied. "The Sith use fear and anger as ends in themselves. We use them as tools in service of protection and justice. The emotion doesn't corrupt, surrendering control to the emotion does." The debate that followed was intense, but civil. Master Yoda probed their philosophy with questions that revealed both its strengths and potential weaknesses. Admiral Tarkin focused on practical applications and strategic value. The other Jedi Masters remained skeptical but engaged. It was when they began discussing specific tactical cooperation that the real tensions emerged. "You're asking us to compromise everything the Jedi Order stands for," Kit Fisto said, his usual warmth replaced by cold analysis. "To work alongside Force users who embrace the very darkness we've sworn to oppose." "I'm asking you to evolve," Kalen replied. "The same way I had to evolve after losing everything I thought I understood about the Force." "And if we refuse?" Master Plo Koon asked. "Then you'll continue fighting the last war while the Sith wage the next one," Zara said bluntly. "And more worlds will burn while the council debates proper meditation techniques. The tension in the room was palpable when an unexpected voice cut through the argument. "I'd like to hear more about these techniques," said a young man stepping through the chamber's side entrance. Kalen recognized him immediately. Kino, one of the most promising knights of the new generation, known for his unconventional thinking and exceptional combat skills. "Kino," Master Plo Koon said with surprise, "you should not be here. This is a classified—" "With respect, Master, I've been monitoring Sith communications for the past month," Kino interrupted, his blue eyes bright with intelligence and determination. "They're planning something massive, something that will make their recent operations look like training exercises." He activated his own holographic display, showing intercepts and analysis that made everyone in the room lean forward with concern. "They're calling it the Final Gambit," Kino continued. "A coordinated strike designed to cripple both the Republic and the Jedi Order simultaneously. And based on their communications, they believe the traditional response will be predictable enough to plan around." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Yoda turned. "How long do we have?" 6 weeks, maybe less," Kino replied. "They're waiting for something, some signal or condition that will trigger the operation." Chancellor Palpatine's hologram flickered again. "The Senate must be informed immediately. We'll need to mobilize every available resource." "No," Kalen said sharply, and everyone turned to look at him. "That's exactly what they're expecting. A massive, conventional response that they can predict and counter. What they're not expecting is a joint operation using tactics they can't anticipate." "We work together, you propose?" Master Yoda said slowly. "Jedi and Grey Order, side by side." "I propose we save the galaxy," Kalen replied. "However, we have to do it." The debate that followed lasted 3 hours. Master Plo Koon and Kit Fisto argued for traditional approaches modified with Grey Order intelligence. Admiral Tarkin pushed for military solutions with Force user support. Chancellor Palpatine suggested expanding Republic authority to deal with the crisis. But it was young Kino who cut through the political maneuvering with a simple question. What happens if we fail? The answer hung in the air like a physical weight. If the Sith succeeded in their final gambit, there might not be a Republic or Jedi Order left to debate proper methodology. "A proposal I have," Yoda said finally. "Joint operation, limited scope. Test this cooperation before larger commitment we make." "What kind of test?" Zara asked. "Intelligence suggests major Sith staging area on Korriban," Admiral Tarkin said, consulting his datapad. "If we could infiltrate and gather intelligence on this final gambit, traditional Jedi approach would fail," Master Plo Koon admitted reluctantly. "Too much dark side presence, too many defenses specifically designed to counter our methods." "But a combined operation," Kino said, his excitement growing. "Grey Order members who can blend in with Sith forces, supported by traditional Jedi for extraction and backup." "Dangerous this would be," Yoda warned. "Trust it would require. Between orders that understand each other, not at all." "Trust has to start somewhere," Elder Naya said quietly. "The galaxy is depending on us to find a way to work together." The agreement they reached was tentative and hedged with restrictions, but it was an agreement nonetheless. A joint operation to infiltrate the Sith staging area on Korriban, with Grey Order members providing deep cover intelligence, while traditional Jedi maintained security and extraction capabilities. As the meeting broke up, Kino approached Kalen privately. "Master Voss, I wanted to ask, would you consider training some of the younger knights in your methods? Not to convert them, but to give them options when traditional approaches aren't sufficient." Kalen studied the young man's earnest expression and saw something he hadn't expected. Hope for the future of the Jedi Order itself. "The techniques are dangerous, Kino. They require perfect emotional control and a willingness to question everything you've been taught about the Force." "Yes, sir. That's exactly why we need to learn them." As Kalen left Cloud City, he reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day on Kalara when his family died and his journey began. He had started as a broken man, seeking only to understand his own pain. Now he was part of something that might reshape the galaxy's understanding of the Force itself. The alliance was fragile, built on necessity rather than trust. But it was a beginning. And if they could prove that Jedi and Grey Order could work together successfully, it might herald a new age where the ancient conflict between light and dark could finally be transcended. The Sith's final gambit was coming, but for the first time since this war began, Kalen felt they might have a real chance of stopping it. The gray dawn of a new era was breaking across the galaxy, and the old certainties were giving way to something unprecedented, hope born from cooperation rather than conquest. Chapter 9. The Shadow War. The ancient Sith stronghold on Car Delba loomed against the blood-red sky like a monument to millennia of accumulated darkness. Built into the living rock of the planet's largest mountain, the Fortress Temple complex had served as a seat of Sith power since before the Republic's founding. Now, intelligence suggested it housed the coordination center for the final gambit that threatened to destroy everything the galaxy had built. Kalen crouched in the shadows of a crystalline outcropping, studying the massive structure through enhanced macro-binoculars. Even from 5 kilometers away, he could feel the weight of dark side energy radiating from the temple like heat from a forge. This was where the Sith had gathered their strength, where the architects of galactic destruction were putting the finishing touches on their master plan. Sensor readings confirm at least 3 Sith Lords in the main complex. Zara's voice whispered through his comm unit. She was positioned on the opposite ridge, providing overwatch and technical support. Dark side signatures are off the charts. Whatever they're doing in there, it's big. Too big for a conventional assault, came Master Plo Koon's measured response from the Jedi strike team's position in orbit. The joint operation had been planned with surgical precision. The Grey Order would infiltrate and gather intelligence, while traditional Jedi forces remained ready to extract them or provide support as needed. But as Kalen studied the fortress, he realized that their carefully laid plans were about to encounter the brutal reality of Sith paranoia and preparation. "There's a problem," he said quietly into his comm. "This isn't just a command center. It's a trap." Through the Force, he could sense the layers of deception built into the fortress itself. The Sith had known about the alliance between Jedi and Grey Order. Somehow, they had anticipated this exact response to their final gambit. The entire complex was designed to draw in Force users and destroy them. "Elaborate!" Master Yoda's voice crackled through the communication link from the command ship. "They're using the temple as a focal point for some kind of ritual," Kalen explained, his enhanced vision picking out details that made his blood chill. "The architecture itself is designed to channel dark side energy. If they complete whatever they're doing, it won't just destroy the Republic. It will create a wound in the Force that corrupts everything within parsecs." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. They had come to stop a military operation and discovered something far worse, a metaphysical weapon that could poison the Force itself. "We abort," Master Plo Koon said decisively. "Return to the extraction point and—" "No," Kalen's voice cut through the chatter with quiet determination. "If we leave now, they complete the ritual. And if that happens, there won't be anywhere in the galaxy far enough away to matter." He rose from his concealment, checking his equipment one final time. His lightsaber hung at his side. But for this mission, it would be a last resort. This required subtlety, infiltration, and the kind of psychological warfare that only someone who understood both light and dark could wage. "I'm going in," he announced, "alone." "Absolutely not," Zara protested. The plan assumed we were dealing with a conventional operation," Kalen interrupted. "This requires someone who can blend in with Sith forces while maintaining enough clarity to disrupt their ritual from within." "Too dangerous, this is," Yoda's voice carried across the comm link, heavy with concern. Lose yourself to the dark side, you could. Or worse, become part of their ritual. That's why I'm the only one who can do it, Kalen replied. I'm the only one here who's walked in darkness without being consumed by it. What followed was the most audacious infiltration in the history of Force warfare. Using techniques learned from Revan's spirit and refined through months of Grey Order operations, Kalen began his approach to the fortress by embracing the very darkness he had spent years learning to control. He allowed a Sith corruption to flow through him, not surrendering to it, but wearing it like a cloak. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what the fortress was designed to attract, a powerful dark side user drawn by the promise of ultimate power. The outer defenses parted before him like water. Sith security protocols, designed to detect Jedi infiltrators, found nothing suspicious about a Force user radiating dark side energy and moving with the confident arrogance expected of their kind. As he entered the fortress proper, Kalen was struck by the sheer scope of what the Sith had constructed. The corridors were lined with chambers where apprentices practiced torture techniques on captured Republic personnel. Training rooms echoed with the clash of lightsabers as dark side adepts honed their skills. And everywhere, the architecture itself pulsed with malevolent energy that would have driven most Jedi to madness within minutes. But Kalen walked through it all as if he belonged there, his presence in the Force perfectly mimicking that of a Sith Lord inspecting his domain. The first real test came when he encountered a group of Sith apprentices dragging a captured Jedi toward what was obviously an interrogation chamber. The prisoner was young, barely more than a Padawan, and his terrified eyes met Kalen's through a curtain of blood and bruises. For a moment, every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to ignite his lightsaber and cut through the apprentices before they could hurt the boy further. But doing so would expose him, doom the mission, and ultimately result in far more deaths when the ritual was completed. Instead, he did something that would have horrified the Jedi Council and impressed the Sith equally. "This one is weak," he said, his voice carrying the cold authority of a true dark side master. "His fear will taint any information you extract. Use the thermal detonators on level 7. Their terror is purer." The apprentices bowed respectfully and changed direction, taking their prisoner toward a different section of the fortress. Kalen had just condemned other captives to save one, but more importantly, he had bought time for the real plan to unfold. As he penetrated deeper into the fortress, he began implementing the psychological warfare techniques that made Grey Order operations so devastatingly effective. A suggestion here, a planted doubt there, carefully crafted to exploit the paranoia that was endemic to Sith culture. He convinced one group of apprentices that their rivals were planning to sabotage the ritual to claim its power for themselves. He whispered to a Sith Lord that the Dark Council suspected him of disloyalty. Most crucially, he began systematically undermining the trust and cooperation that the ritual required to function. By the time he reached the central chamber where the final gambit was being coordinated, the fortress was already beginning to tear itself apart from within. The chamber itself was a masterwork of Sith architecture, a vast circular space, carved from black stone and lined with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light of braziers filled with what looked suspiciously like Force-sensitive crystals. At the center stood 3 figures in elaborate robes, the Sith Lords whose combined power was meant to channel the ritual that would wound the Force itself. And standing at the ritual's focal point, his back to the entrance, was a figure in a hooded cloak whose presence made the air itself seem to recoil. "Darth Nihilus," Kalen whispered, recognizing the legendary Sith Lord whose hunger for Force energy had once consumed entire worlds. He was supposed to be dead, destroyed centuries ago, but the figure at the ritual's center radiated the same terrible emptiness that the ancient texts described. "Welcome, Grey Jedi," the figure said without turning around, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the Force itself. "I have been expecting you." The trap was sprung with devastating efficiency. Force barriers slammed down around the chamber, cutting off any escape route. The three Sith Lords ignited their lightsabers in perfect synchronization, their combined presence in the Force creating a web of dark side energy that would have paralyzed most opponents. But Kalen had faced overwhelming odds before, and he had learned something that neither pure Jedi nor pure Sith truly understood. When fighting multiple opponents with different approaches, the key was not to match their unity, but to exploit their differences. The battle that erupted in the ritual chamber was unlike anything the ancient fortress had witnessed. Kalen fought not as a Jedi would, defensively, seeking to minimize conflict, nor as a Sith would aggressively, seeking to dominate through power. Instead, he fought as something entirely new. Against the first Sith Lord, he used pure light side techniques, healing his own wounds faster than they could be inflicted, and turning the Sith's own rage into a weapon against him. Against the second, he employed classic Sith tactics, overwhelming her with controlled fury and superior skill. Against the third, he did something that shocked them all. He refused to fight at all, instead using Force persuasion to show the Sith Lord the futility of his devotion to an order that would discard him the moment he became inconvenient. But it was his confrontation with the figure claiming to be Darth Nihilus that pushed him to the limits of what the Grey Path could achieve. "You think you understand balance," the ancient Sith said, as their lightsabers clashed in the chamber's center. "But you are still bound by the illusion that light and dark are separate forces. I will show you the truth, that both are merely aspects of hunger." Nihilus attacked not just with his lightsaber, but with his legendary ability to drain the Force itself from his opponents. Kalen felt his connection to the light side being severed, his carefully maintained balance disrupted, as the ancient Sith tried to consume his very essence. But instead of fighting the drain, Kalen did something unprecedented. He opened himself completely to both aspects of the Force, allowing light and dark to flow through him simultaneously in perfect harmony. The result was a resonance that Nihilus's hunger couldn't process. Energy that was neither fully light nor fully dark, but something entirely new. The feedback was devastating. Nihilus staggered back, his ancient form wavering as his signature ability encountered something it couldn't consume. In that moment of vulnerability, Kalen struck not with his lightsaber, but with the same technique he had used against Darth Reaper on Kashyyyk. Pure balance flowed out from him, light and dark in perfect equilibrium, creating a harmonic frequency that shattered the ritual array and sent shockwaves through the Force itself. The effect on the assembled Sith was immediate and devastating. Their connection to the dark side was disrupted, their coordination destroyed, their unity replaced by the chaos and paranoia that Kalen had been carefully cultivating throughout the fortress. The ancient fortress began to tear itself apart, as centuries of accumulated dark side energy was suddenly released, without the ritual structure to contain it. Sith turned on Sith as the psychological warfare Kalen had waged throughout his infiltration bore fruit. Apprentices killed their masters, rivals settled old scores, and the careful hierarchy that held the operation together collapsed into murderous anarchy. As he fought his way toward the chamber's exit, Kalen felt the fortress beginning to collapse around him. The ritual's disruption had created a cascade failure in the dark side nexus that powered the entire complex. He had perhaps minutes before the whole mountain came down. "Extraction now!" he shouted into his comm as he burst from the main complex into the courtyard where chaos reigned supreme. The response was immediate. Jedi fighters screamed down from orbit, their blue energy weapons cutting through the confusion, as Master Plo Koon and his strike team fought their way to the extraction point. But even as they provided cover, Kalen realized that their escape was going to cost lives. Sith survivors were rallying around the remaining lords, and their combined power was enough to threaten the Jedi extraction force. Traditional Jedi tactics would require a fighting withdrawal that could take hours, time they didn't have, before the fortress's collapse killed everyone in the area. So Kalen made a choice that embodied everything the Grey Path represented. Standing in the center of the collapsing courtyard, he opened himself completely to the Force, not just light or dark, but the fundamental energy that connected all living things. The technique was beyond dangerous. It was potentially suicidal, but it was also the only way to save everyone, Jedi and Sith alike. The wave of pure Force energy that erupted from him was visible to the naked eye, a sphere of light and shadow that expanded outward at the speed of thought. Every Force user it touched, Sith Lord and Jedi Knight, Dark Apprentice, and Light Side Adept, felt the same thing. A moment of perfect clarity, in which they understood exactly what they were fighting for and what they were fighting against. For the Sith, it was a revelation of the ultimate emptiness of their path, the realization that power pursued for its own sake led only to destruction and isolation. For the Jedi, it was an understanding that rigid adherence to doctrine could blind them to the nuances of justice and mercy that their calling truly demanded. But, for everyone present, it was proof that the Force was larger than their petty conflicts, that the energy which bound the galaxy together was not meant to be a weapon in an eternal war, but a bridge toward something greater. The fighting stopped. In the sudden silence, as the ancient fortress continued its death throes around them, Sith and Jedi alike found themselves staring at the man who had just demonstrated something that their respective philosophies claimed was impossible. "The evacuation ships are here," Master Plo Koon announced, his voice carrying a wonder that mechanical breathing couldn't disguise. "All personnel, including—" He paused, looking at the Sith survivors. "All personnel to extraction points." What followed was perhaps the strangest moment in the history of Force warfare. Jedi and Sith working together to escape a collapsing fortress, their ancient enmity temporarily set aside in the face of imminent death and the lingering effects of Kalan's demonstration. As the last evacuation ship cleared Car Delba's atmosphere, Kalan collapsed from the strain of what he had done. Channeling that much Force energy should have killed him. Would have killed anyone else. But somehow, his understanding of balance had allowed him to survive an expenditure of power that defied every known law of Force physics. "Impossible," whispered one of the Sith survivors, a young apprentice who had felt her entire worldview crumble in the space of a single moment. "How did you—" "By remembering that the Force doesn't belong to any of us," Kalan replied, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We belong to it, and it wants more for us than endless war." The final gambit was broken, its architects dead or converted, its infrastructure destroyed. But more importantly, something new had been born in the shadow of that ancient fortress, proof that the conflict between light and dark was not inevitable, that there was indeed another way. The war wasn't over. There would be other Sith Lords, other schemes, other battles between the forces of order and chaos. But now, there was also hope that those battles might someday end not in the victory of one side over another, but in the transcendence of the conflict itself. The Grey Path had proven itself not just in theory, but in practice, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. Chapter 10. A New Dawn. 5 years later. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rebuilt academy on Yavin 8, where the Grey Order had returned to establish their permanent home. The ruins of the ancient temple had been transformed into something entirely new. A place where the crystalline formations that had once channeled dark side energy now resonated with the balanced harmony that defined the Grey Path. Kalan stood in the main training courtyard, watching as his students practiced the morning exercises that had become fundamental to their philosophy. Unlike the rigid forms of traditional Jedi training or the chaotic aggression of Sith instruction, These movements flowed seamlessly between light and dark techniques, teaching control through integration rather than suppression. Feel the emotion, he instructed a group of older students who were working with advanced techniques. Acknowledge its power, understand its purpose, but never let it control your choices. Among them was Siatal, now 17 and one of the Academy's most promising advanced students. The young Twi'lek, who had once been a slave, had grown into a confident young woman, whose mastery of balanced force techniques would have astounded both Jedi Masters and Sith Lords. She moved with grace through a complex series that combined healing meditation with controlled lightning generation, demonstrating the core principle that had made the Grey Order so effective. Master Kalen, another student called out, a human boy named Jorek, who had been brought to them after being rejected by the Jedi Temple for his emotional instability. Under Grey Order training, that same emotional intensity had become his greatest strength. The visitors from Coruscant have arrived. Kalen nodded, watching as a Republic transport settled onto the Academy's landing platform. The regular visits from Jedi representatives had become routine over the past 5 years, as the two orders worked to maintain the uneasy cooperation that had emerged from the Car Delba operation. The delegation that emerged from the transport was familiar. Master Yoda, moving more slowly than he had 5 years ago, but still radiating ancient wisdom. Kino, now a full Jedi Knight, whose unconventional approaches had made him valuable as a liaison between the orders. And Zara, who split her time between the Academy and the Jedi Temple as she worked to bridge the philosophical gap between their teachings. Master Voss, Yoda greeted him, his eyes taking in the thriving Academy with something that might have been pride. Impressive, what you have built here. Changed much, the galaxy has, since first we met on this moon. It was true. The destruction of the final gambit and the subsequent philosophical revelations had sent shockwaves throughout the Force-using communities. Some Sith had indeed laid down their weapons, seeking the balance that Kalen had demonstrated was possible. Others had retreated deeper into darkness, forming splinter cults that were more dangerous but far less organized than the previous Sith hierarchy. Within the Jedi Order itself, the changes had been even more dramatic. A younger generation of knights, led by figures like Kino, had begun questioning the rigid doctrines that had defined their order for millennia. While the Council remained officially committed to traditional ways, there was a growing acceptance that perhaps their understanding of the Force had been incomplete. "The Senate report?" Kalen asked, as they walked toward the Academy's council chambers. "Favorable mostly," Kino replied, consulting a datapad. Grey Order operations continue to show superior effectiveness against dark side threats. Civilian casualties are down 70% in sectors where you've been active. Even the military brass is starting to acknowledge that your methods work. They entered the council chamber where Elder Naya waited, her ancient presence as serene and powerful as ever. At 93, she had become the Academy's chief philosopher, helping to codify the Grey Path into teachings that could be passed down through generations. "But there's resistance," Zara added, taking her seat at the circular table that had replaced the hierarchical arrangements favored by both traditional orders. "Some members of both the Jedi Council and the Senate are concerned about the precedent we're setting." "Precedent of what?" Kalen asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Of independently of traditional oversight Force users operating," Master Yoda said carefully. "Fear, some do, that Grey Order represents challenge to established authority." It was the same argument they'd been having for 5 years. The Grey Order's success had made them valuable allies, but it had also made them potentially dangerous to institutions that depended on maintaining the traditional light versus dark paradigm. "The quarterly reports," Elder Naya said, activating a holographic display that showed their current activities across the galaxy. 17 active operations, 43 graduates serving as independent peacekeepers, 12 collaborative missions with traditional Jedi forces. The data was impressive and undeniable. Grey Order graduates were serving as diplomats in conflicts too complex for traditional Jedi intervention, as healers in regions where the dark side had left lasting wounds, and as teachers helping Force-sensitive individuals who didn't fit the narrow requirements of either major order. "And the Sith remnants?" Kino asked. "Fragmented, but not eliminated," Kalen admitted. "The revelation at Cardelba broke their unified command structure, but it didn't convert everyone. We're dealing with smaller, more fanatical groups now, harder to predict, but easier to contain. Some have approached us," Zara added quietly. "Former Sith looking for redemption. A way back from the darkness they've known. Not all of them are ready for what we offer, but some are," Siatal said from the chamber's entrance, where she had been quietly listening. "Like Master Kalan was. Like all of us were. In our own ways." The young woman's words carried weight beyond her years. She had grown up in the Grey Order, had never known the rigid divisions that had defined earlier generations of Force users. To her, the idea that light and dark could coexist in balance wasn't revolutionary. It was simply how the Force worked. "The younglings," Master Yoda observed, his ancient eyes studying Siatal with interest. "Changed, they have not been, by these teachings. Always known this balance, they have." "Because we never told them it was impossible," Elder Naya said with a slight smile. "The artificial division between light and dark is learned, not natural. Remove the cultural conditioning, and balance comes as easily as breathing." They spent the rest of the day reviewing specific cases and operations, discussing the ongoing challenges of maintaining cooperation between organizations with fundamentally different philosophies. But it was during the evening meal, as they sat together in the Academy's dining hall surrounded by students from dozens of worlds and backgrounds, that the real significance of what they had built became clear. At one table, a former Jedi Padawan, who had been expelled for emotional attachments, was helping a young Zabrak overcome the trauma that had led him to briefly embrace the dark side. At another, a group of students were debating the ethics of using Force persuasion in diplomatic situations, their discussion encompassing viewpoints that would have been heretical to both traditional orders. And in the corner, a small group was practicing meditation techniques that Elder Naya had learned from the Gensarai, their instructor, a former Sith apprentice who had found his way to balance through pain and redemption. "This is what we fought for," Kalen said quietly, watching the scene with something approaching contentment. "Not victory over our enemies, but the possibility of something better than eternal conflict. Heavy price it has required," Yoda observed, his voice carrying the weight of all they had lost along the way. "Dex Corrin, others who fell before reaching balance. But their sacrifice wasn't meaningless," Zara said firmly. "Every person here represents a choice to be more than what tradition demanded. Dex's final choice to save Siatal, instead of serving his old masters, is part of what made this possible." As the evening wore on, and the visitors prepared to return to Coruscant, Kalen found himself alone with his thoughts in the Academy's central meditation chamber. The room was built around one of the moon's natural crystal formations, and the Force flowed through it in patterns that would have amazed the ancient Jedi who had first sensed the potential in this place. He wasn't alone for long. Siatal entered quietly, moving with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the universe. "Master," she said, settling into a meditation pose beside him, "I've been thinking about something Master Yoda said, about the price we've paid for balance. And I don't think we paid a price. I think we invested in something. Every person who chose the gray path over the easy certainties of light or dark, every student who learned that they didn't have to choose between their emotions and their principles, they're all investments in a future where the kind of wars our parents fought don't have to happen." Kalen smiled, remembering the grief-stricken man who had knelt in the ruins of his home and felt the dark side answer his call. That man had thought his journey was about personal redemption, about finding a way to use power without being corrupted by it. He had been wrong. It had been about something much larger, the possibility that the Force itself wanted more for its servants than endless conflict. The students are ready for advanced training, Siatal continued. Not just in techniques, but in philosophy. They want to understand not just how to balance light and dark, but why it matters. And what would you tell them? The young woman was quiet for a moment, her presence in the Force as balanced and serene as a lake at dawn. When she spoke, her words carried the wisdom of someone who had grown up believing that impossible things were simply things that hadn't been achieved yet. I would tell them that the Force doesn't care about our categories, she said finally. Light and dark, Jedi and Sith, good and evil. Those are words we use to make sense of something too big for words. But the Force itself wants life, growth, connection. It wants us to be more than what we were, to reach for something better than what we've known. And the gray path is just a way of listening to what the Force has been trying to tell us all along. That we don't have to choose between strength and compassion, between power and peace. That true wisdom comes from understanding that we can be all of these things, as long as we remember that the choice to be better is one we have to make every day. Outside the meditation chamber, the Academy continued its quiet evening routines. Students practiced their exercises, teachers prepared lessons for the next day, and the crystal formations hummed with the balanced energy that had become their signature. It was a small community on a remote moon, but its influence was spreading across the galaxy like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. In the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, young knights were quietly incorporating gray techniques into their training, learning that emotional control didn't have to mean emotional suppression. In the far reaches of the Outer Rim, former Sith were finding their way to redemption through balance rather than surrender. And in the corridors of power on dozens of worlds, diplomats and leaders were discovering that there were more options available than the traditional choice between absolute positions. The galaxy was vast, and change came slowly to civilizations measured in millennia rather than years. But change was coming nonetheless, carried forward by individuals who had learned that the ancient conflict between light and dark was not inevitable, that with wisdom, courage, and the willingness to transcend old limitations, even the most fundamental assumptions could be questioned and improved upon. Kalen Voss had begun his journey as a broken man seeking to understand his own pain. He ended it as a teacher, a bridge between worlds, and proof that the Force's greatest gift was not power, but the possibility of transformation. The gray path was no longer just a philosophy or a technique. It was a living demonstration that hope was justified, that growth was possible, and that the future could indeed be better than the past. As the twin moons of Yavin rose over the Academy, casting silver light across the crystal formations that sang with balanced energy, the next generation of Force users prepared for sleep knowing that they lived in a galaxy where anything was possible, even peace. The dawn of a new age had indeed broken across the stars, and its light was neither purely bright nor touched with shadow, but something entirely new. The gentle radiance of wisdom earned through trial, tempered by loss, and ultimately triumphant in its quiet assertion that love was stronger than fear, growth more powerful than stagnation, and balance more enduring than any victory achieved through force alone. The gray path stretched out before them, leading toward a future that none of the ancient orders had dared to imagine. A future where the Force served life rather than ideology, where strength came from unity rather than dominance, and where the greatest power was the wisdom to know when not to use power at all. It was a future worth fighting for. It was a future worth building. One student, one choice, one act of compassion at a time. The galaxy was ready for it. The question was whether they were ready for the responsibility that came with such unprecedented hope. Time, as always, would tell. But for the first time in millennia, time seemed to be on their side.